Good morning, everyone.
Good
Okay.
morning and
We are
welcome
learning.
back.
Thank you.
Mistletoe.
And
Thank
Mazel
you.
Tov.
Thank you. Thank you. We are learning Mishnah's Bava Kamma, Parakeh, Chapter 5, Mishnah Zai, Mishnah 7. You got it?
Oh, I thought you said Vov. Sorry.
Zion. All right. Here we go. Now, the point of this Mishnah is going to be that there are many places in the Torah that the Torah specifies or talks about specific animals regarding to the law. And the point of the Mishnah is going to be that it doesn't only apply to those specific animals, it applies to all animals. And it kind of breaks it down first to that the Torah gives an example of a domesticated animal, and the Mishnah tells us it doesn't only mean it doesn't only mean that specific domesticated animal. It includes all domesticated animals. But then at the end, the Mishnah is going to tell us it's not only by domesticated animals, it's even by wild animals and birds. So the Mishnah reads, Echad shar ve'echad kol behema l'nefilas habar. The same law applies to an ox or to any domesticated animal that falls into a pit, right? We've been talking about until now the damager of a pit, of bar. And the Torah talks about by a bar, a chamar, or a shar, an ox, or a donkey. So the Torah gave specific examples, and we know that there are things we derive from the fact that the Torah used an animal as an example. But the Mishnah is telling us that the specific examples that the Torah gives in the case of bar, which is shar, you just mentioned the shar. The Torah talks about shar, or an ox and a donkey. But now the Mishnah is telling us that regarding falling into the bar and the obligation to pay for that animal that fell in applies to both a shar, an ox, which is mentioned in the Torah, and all domesticated animals. Another example here is Lafrashas Har Sinai, the separation at Mount Sinai. That means like this. When the divine presence rested upon Mount Sinai, animals and people were not allowed to go on the mountain or even to touch its edge. As it states, beware of ascending the mountain or touching its edge. Whoever touches the mountain, whether animal, and the word is behema. Behema is the term that's used for a domesticated animal. So the Torah says whether it's a behema or a person, he shall die. So although the Torah uses the word behema, domestic animal, the prohibition applied to all types of animals. Okay, so behema is a domestic animal, lives amongst people, and although the Torah specifically talked about there, it said behema, it's going to really apply not just to. There it doesn't say specific behema, it just says behema, but as we're going to see, it applies to all animals. Next, ulatashlume kefal, and regarding the payment, the double payment, the Torah commands a thief to pay the owner double. That is the item he stole or its value, plus an additional fine of the same amount. The source for this double payment is the pasuk that says, if the theft shall be found in his possession, whether it is a live ox or a donkey or a seh, okay, that means donkey, ox, donkey, or any kind of sheep or goats, he shall pay double. This law, too, pertains to all animals, despite the fact that the verse mentions only certain species. Right? That's the point here. Torah mentions specific species. Nonetheless, it refers to all animals. The truth is that it doesn't only apply to animals. It applies to inanimate objects too. That we know. It applies to inanimate objects also. But this is just another example of where the Torah gave a specific example of an animal, and it doesn't mean just that animal. Next, when it comes to returning a lost article, there again, when Torah talks about returning a lost article, the Torah says, you shall not see the ox of your brother or his seh, which means a sheep or goat, going astray. Right? The Torah there gives an example of specific animals, ox or seh, and the Torah and the Mishna is saying, does it only apply to those behemoths, those domestic animals, applies to all. And as we're going to see, it applies to all animals, and here too, it applies even to inanimate objects. But again, it's another example of where the Torah spoke about specific animals, and we're saying it doesn't only apply to those specific animals. Next case, laprika. Unloading a burden from an animal. Here again, one must help to unload a burden from an animal that is struggling beneath it, as the Torah states. If you see the donkey of your enemy sitting under its load, would you refrain from helping him? You must surely help him. So the Torah's example was a donkey. Again, the obligation applies to all animals, not just to donkeys. And we know there's a parallel mitzvah. This is the mitzvah of unloading, and there's also a parallel mitzvah to help someone load an animal whose burden has fallen off. Regarding this mitzvah as well, although the Torah mentions only an ox and a donkey, all animals are included. All right, next example. Lachasima, muzzling an animal when it's threshing grain. Like loisachsam shar bedisha. You shall not muzzle an animal while it is threshing grain. And we know that halacha is number one. The Torah said you shall not muzzle an ox when threshing. Threshing doesn't only mean threshing; it means performing other kinds of agricultural labor. And again, although it mentioned oxen, nonetheless, it does not apply only to ox, but also to all animals. That's chasima. L'kilayim. Kilayim is mixture, the prohibition of mixing animals. There are two parts to this prohibition. Number one, mating animals of different species and having different species of animals work together. Here again, the Torah talks about a behema. In the case of mating, it talks about a behema. In case of working together, it talks about an ox and a donkey. And the point here is that those the Torah is not being specific only to those types of animals. And the last example is Shabbos. Regarding the prohibition of having your animal work on Shabbos, it applies again. Here it says the Torah talks about when it talks about the prohibition of your animal working. It says your ox, your donkey, and your every animal. Again, it specifically talks about behemoths. As we're going to see, this is not all these prohibitions do not only apply to the specific behemoths mentioned or to just behemoths, domestic animals. It's going to apply to all, and all these are derived. And the fact that it applies to other animals is derived from the Gemara derives it from the verses of the Torah, and then the Mishnah continues. The same thing applies to a chaya, which means a wild animal, not domestic, a bird. I'm sorry, I didn't read it right. And so too, a wild animal, a wild beast, a bird are similar to all the behemoths, the domestic animals that are mentioned before in all these examples. So now the Mishnah says, Im kain, if so, lama nemar shara chamar. Why did the Torah just specify shara chamar? In all the cases where it got specific, and I mentioned an ox, I mentioned a donkey, specific, I mean, the example we're talking about right now is by a bar, is by a pit, right? By a bar, the examples the Torah gave were shar or chamar, a donkey, an ox or a donkey. If the halacha is that applies to all animals, why did the Torah use these specific examples? And the answer is, Elashadibra hakasav bahiva. The pasuk spoke about the most common case, right? The Torah talks about the usual case. That is, the Torah mentions the ox and the donkey because it was common for these animals to walk freely in the streets where they might fall into a pit. And they explain here in the notes, since oxen were used for threshing grain and other field work, and donkeys were used to carry burdens, these animals were frequently on the streets. And therefore, it was common for them to fall into a pit. But it doesn't only apply to those animals, it applies to other animals too. Similarly, to illustrate each of the laws listed above, the Torah shows the most common examples. And therefore, the fact that the Torah specifies an animal or only mentions behemoths, domestic animals, that's not to the exclusion of other animals. It's just mentioning that because that's the most common case. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you, Rabbi.